Another view of the Ben Franklin Bridge. They are painting it right now, but as you can see, they started on the New Jersey side. They're making their way down to our side. It looks great too. They're getting pretty close, and what they've done looks extraordinary. Again, the longest suspension bridge in the world, 1.8 miles in length, when completed back in 1926. Now, this old city neighborhood, by the mid-20th century, was not a place people hung out, or at least wanted to hang out, because we had lost our place as a great industrial city, and this area became pretty run down. Coming up here on the left side is Elfrist Alley. This little alleyway here, Elfrist Alley, is actually the longest lived-on street in the United States. People have lived continuously down that alleyway since 1702. Must be some very old people. No, some of the properties date to the 1720s, and they're private homes, and not inexpensive these days, because this is a very popular area now, because about 25 years ago, the young starving artists, the Bohemians of Philadelphia, came back into this area and started converting the old factories and warehouses into cool loft apartments and condos. And these days, this area is very fashionable and expensive. But there's a couple of properties on Elfrist Alley that are actually run like little museums, so that you can get a sense of working-class Philadelphia, colonial style. This area was where the working class, artisans and craftsmen, the city lived in the colonial period. You can get a sense of their life if you check out those properties. The Christ Church. We passed this during our walk, but I didn't tell you much about it. But if you take a look, as we make our turn to the right, if you look out the right, you'll see one of the oldest and most beautiful churches in the city, the Christ Church. Christ Church was the congregation established 1695, and it was Church of England. During our tour, I was talking about how the idea of freedom of conscience, religious freedom, was big. Well, here you had very early on the establishment of a Church of England, or Anglican Church. That was the big enemy of the Quakers back in England. But all were welcome to worship here. But if you look at the tower on this on the church, the tower was completed in the 1750s, and 199 feet off the ground. To the top of the bell tower. This was the highest, or the tallest building in North America for about 70 years, the Christ Church. And it's a very beautiful building. It's one of the great examples of Georgian-style church architecture. Georgian style is, the colonists like to call the style Georgian after the King's George in England. But in Europe they would have called it Palladian or neoclassical. Ben Franklin lived the last 5 years of his amazing life in the courtyard that you can get to if you go through the little archway that comes up on our left in a moment. But all of these properties, through that archway there, but all those properties were owned by Ben Franklin in his lifetime. And in time for the nation's 200th birthday, our bicentennial year in 1976, they created an underground museum that's part of our national park for people who want to go and learn about the greatest Philadelphian of them all, Ben Franklin. And now we're going to go right through the heart of the national park again in a moment, and you guys will get a last beautiful view of the Independence Hall on the left side. Now, we're going to make a right turn next block, and when we make our turn to the right, you'll notice a property on the left side. If you look out on the left side at the corner, a property that looks a little bit out of place among these more modern properties. But that's where Thomas Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence. But that was the home of Jacob Graff, who was a bricklayer in Philadelphia. He rented the second floor rooms to Jefferson, who was serving the Continental Congress, and Jefferson up there in June 1776 would write the Declaration. Now we're going to turn onto Arch Street. When we make our turn at the corner, I want you to take note, it'll be on the right side when we turn. The first major museum in the nation sharing the history of African Americans. The African American Museum of Philadelphia. Right here at the corner, on the right side. Those 13 bells there are the whispering bells of freedom. 13 bells recognizing the original 13 states. They're called the whispering bells because the artist put no clappers in those bells, nothing to make them ring. This was a way for the artist to symbolize the silence endured by African Americans, of course, for so much of their history in our country. These are future tour guides in training.